I'm Nancy, 28, female. I live in a moderately sized city, in a home my husband David and I bought 2 years ago after I closed the biggest deal of my career. I'm a real estate agent, and he's a graphic designer, and together we've built a life that I was, until recently, incredibly proud of. It was a life of careful planning, hard work, and mutual respect, a sanctuary we had created for ourselves. But a single weekend, a single act of betrayal, was enough to threaten the foundations of everything, proving that the most devastating storms often come from the people you invite into your home. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Life, for the most part, was good. At 28, I felt like I had finally hit my stride. The world of real estate is a relentless grind, a chaotic dance of market trends, client emotions, and endless paperwork. It's a field that chews people up and spits them out. But I had found my footing, thriving on the pressure and the satisfaction of handing a young family the keys to their first home, or helping an elderly couple downsize into a comfortable retirement condo. My success wasn't a matter of luck. It was a product of 16-hour days, of missing social events to host open houses, of spending my weekends studying zoning laws instead of brunching with friends. David was my rock through it all. His work as a graphic designer offered him a more predictable 9-to-5 schedule, and he was the steady, calming presence in my whirlwind life. He'd have dinner ready for me when I stumbled home, exhausted and smelling of freshly painted walls and stale coffee. He'd listen to me vent about difficult clients and celebrate every small victory as if it were his own. Our home was a testament to our partnership, a cozy 2-story colonial we'd lovingly renovated, room by room. Our savings account, the one I meticulously managed, was the quiet symbol of our shared future, a future we dreamed of filling with travel, maybe a dog, and eventually children. It held nearly $100,000, a sum I was immensely proud of, every dollar a brick in the foundation of the life we were building. My relationship with my older sister, Jessica, had always been a bit more complicated. We were close, bound by the shared memories of childhood, but our paths had diverged significantly in adulthood. While I was driven and ambitious, Jessica was more content with a simpler, less demanding life. She worked as a dental hygienist, a stable job she was good at but felt little passion for. She had married Mark, a man who from the very beginning had rubbed me the wrong way. He worked in IT support, a job he frequently complained about, and carried himself with an air of unearned superiority. He dabbled in day trading, a side hustle. He boasted about at every family gathering, speaking in a flurry of technical jargon that I suspected was designed more to impress than to inform. He'd flash his new smartwatch or talk about the next big stock. Yet he and Jessica were in a perpetual state of financial precarity. They lived in a cramped apartment, drove a car that was constantly in the shop, and always seemed to be one unexpected bill away from a crisis. There was a subtle but persistent undercurrent of resentment from them, a faint bitterness that clung to their compliments about my new car or the commission I'd earned on a recent sale. It was in the way Mark's smile never quite reached his eyes when he'd say, "Must be nice." Or how Jessica would sigh and talk about how they could never afford a vacation like the one David and I were planning. I tried to be sensitive to their struggles, often treating them to dinner and never discussing my finances in detail. I loved my sister, and for her sake I tolerated Mark, choosing to believe that his arrogance was just a mask for his own insecurities. I saw him as a harmless annoyance, a slightly pathetic figure whose grand ambitions were constantly foiled by his own mediocrity. I never once imagined he could be a threat. I never imagined that the envy simmering just beneath the surface was not harmless, but a venomous poison waiting for the right moment to strike. That was my first and most costly mistake. The annual family reunion was a tradition my mother insisted upon, a mandatory gathering of the clan held every year at my parents' sprawling, slightly dated home. It was always a loud, chaotic affair, filled with the shrieks of my cousin's children, the smell of my dad's over-barbecued chicken, and the familiar rhythm of family gossip. This year was no different. David and I arrived mid-afternoon, armed with a cooler of craft beer and a homemade cheesecake that was my mother's favorite. The sun was high, the backyard was buzzing with activity, and for a few hours, everything felt normal. I caught up with aunts and uncles, played with my younger cousins, and managed to have a decent conversation with my dad about the housing market. But as the afternoon wore on and the beer began to flow, I found myself cornered by Jessica and Mark near the patio. It started innocuously enough, with Jessica admiring my watch, a classic timepiece David had bought me for our anniversary. "Wow, Nancy," she said, her fingers tracing the leather strap. "That's beautiful. Must have cost a fortune." Before I could respond, Mark chimed in, a familiar, calculating glint in his eye. "Business must be booming, huh? You're killing it. We see your face on bus stops all over town." I gave a modest shrug. "It's been a good year. I've been working hard." Mark took a swig of his beer and leaned in closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Jess and I have been thinking. We're tired of throwing our money away on rent. We want to get into the market, buy a place of our own." I was pleasantly surprised. This was the first time Mark had shown any real initiative beyond his vague stock market schemes. "That's great, Mark. It's a smart move. The market is competitive, but with a good down payment, you can definitely find something." His eyes locked onto mine. "Yeah, about that. The down payment is the tricky part. We were thinking maybe you could help us out, a loan, just to get us started. 50,000. You'd make that back in one commission, right?" The air grew thick. The casual, festive atmosphere of the reunion suddenly evaporated, replaced by a tense, transactional silence. David, sensing the shift, came to stand beside me, placing a steadying hand on my back. I looked from Mark's expectant face to my sister's, who was avoiding my gaze, tracing patterns on her plastic cup. I felt a knot of disappointment tighten in my stomach. It wasn't just a loan, it was the casual, entitled way he'd asked, as if my hard-earned money was a communal family resource he had a right to. "Mark," I began, choosing my words carefully, "I appreciate you coming to me, but I can't do that. Our savings are tied up in investments and our own financial plans. It's not just sitting in a checking account." This was a partial lie. The money was accessible, but I wasn't about to hand over half of it on a whim. "What I can do," I continued, trying to soften the blow, "is sit down with you both, go over your finances, and help you create a budget. I can help you figure out a realistic savings plan to get you to your goal." Mark's face soured. The charming facade crumbled, revealing a flash of raw, ugly anger. He let out a short, derisive snort. "A budget? We don't need a lecture, Nancy. We need capital." Jessica finally looked at me, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and pleading. "He's right, Nan. We're just stuck. It feels like we're drowning, and you're not." The accusation in her voice stung more than Mark's greed. The conversation ended there, dissolving into an awkward silence that the cheerful noise of the party couldn't quite fill. For the rest of the evening, I felt a chill. Mark was pointedly ignoring me, while Jessica offered weak, apologetic smiles from across the yard. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just Mark being Mark. But I couldn't ignore the feeling of unease, the sense that a line had been crossed. I had always viewed their financial struggles with a degree of sympathy. Now, for the first time, I saw them with a chilling clarity. It wasn't just a struggle, it was a grievance, and I was the one they held responsible. The following morning, I woke up with a lingering sense of disquiet from the reunion. The awkwardness of the conversation with Mark and Jessica had left a bad taste in my mouth. David was already up, making coffee, and the smell of it filled the house, a comforting aroma that usually signaled the start of a productive day. I had a client, a first-time homebuyer, who was supposed to wire her earnest money deposit that morning, and I wanted to confirm it had landed in my brokerage escrow account before our 10 o'clock meeting. After pouring myself a mug of coffee, I sat down at my laptop in the kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the window. I navigated to my online banking portal, typed in my password, and waited for the page to load. My eyes went straight to the savings account, the one that held our future, our dreams, our security, and then my world tilted on its axis. The number on the screen was wrong, horrifyingly, devastatingly wrong. It read $7, 345, 12. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, convinced I was misreading it, that the numbers were blurry from sleep. I refreshed the page. The number remained unchanged. A cold, creeping dread washed over me, so intense it felt like being plunged into icy water. I clicked on the account details, my hand trembling so badly that the mouse skittered across the screen. There, on the transaction history, was a single line item from the previous day, timestamped at 4:17 p.m., right in the middle of the family reunion. A wire transfer, outgoing, for $90,000, $90,000. The room started to spin. I felt a wave of nausea, and the coffee in my mug seemed to mock me with its warmth and normalcy. David, I whispered, my voice a strangled, unfamiliar sound. He was at the counter, reading the news on his tablet, and he looked up, his brow furrowed with concern at my tone. What is it, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost. The money? I stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. It's gone, almost all of it. He rushed to my side, his eyes scanning the screen. His face went pale, his usual calm demeanor shattering like glass. He grabbed the laptop, holding it closer as if the proximity would somehow change the stark, brutal reality of the numbers. What? No, that can't be right. It's a glitch. It has to be a bank error. We both clung to that possibility, that thin, desperate thread of hope. A glitch, a mistake. A technical foul-up that would be rectified with a simple phone call. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed the bank's customer service number. The cheerful, automated voice on the other end was a grotesque counterpoint to the panic clawing its way up my throat. I navigated the menu, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, each second of hold music an eternity of torture. When a live person finally answered, I practically shouted my story into the phone, the words tumbling out in a panicked rush. The representative, a calm and methodical woman named Sarah, asked for my account details and put me on a brief hold. David paced the kitchen behind me, running his hands through his hair. The silence stretched, filled only by the frantic beating of my own heart. When Sarah came back on the line, her voice was grave. "Ma'am," she said, her professional tone doing nothing to soften the blow, "I can confirm that a wire transfer for $90,000 was initiated from your account yesterday afternoon. It was authenticated using your two-factor security questions and the confirmation code sent to the phone number on file. My phone. I looked at my phone, which had been in my purse the entire time at the party. But where did it go?" Sarah paused. "I'm afraid I can't disclose the recipient's account information due to privacy policies. However, I can tell you that the transfer has been completed. The funds are no longer in our system. I've flagged the transaction as potentially fraudulent, and I strongly advise you to file a police report." Immediately, the line went dead, but I kept the phone pressed to my ear, the finality of her words echoing in the sudden silence of the kitchen. It wasn't a glitch, it wasn't a mistake. Someone had deliberately, methodically, and successfully stolen our life savings. And the sick, horrifying realization began to dawn. The theft had happened while I was surrounded by family. The hours after the phone call were a blur of numb disbelief and rising panic. We filed a police report, a sterile and impersonal process that offered little comfort. A bored-looking officer took our statement, his weary expression suggesting that our stolen life savings was just another file in a mountain of unsolvable cybercrimes. The bank's fraud department was equally unhelpful, hiding behind a wall of corporate jargon and vague promises of an internal investigation that could take weeks with no guarantee of recovery. We were on our own. The feeling of violation was absolute. It was more than just the money, it was the surgical precision of the theft. They had known my password, the answers to my security questions. What was the name of your first pet? What street did you grow up on? Information that wasn't easily guessable by a stranger, and they had somehow accessed the two-factor authentication code sent to my phone. David and I sat at our dining room table, a stack of useless paperwork between us, trying to piece together the impossible. "Who knows the name of your first cat was Whiskers?" David asked, his voice strained. "Everyone," I said, my heart sinking. "My whole family. I used to tell stories about him all the time." The circle of suspects was small and horrifyingly intimate. My mind kept replaying the scene at the reunion. My purse had been on a chair in the living room for most of the afternoon, easily accessible to anyone who walked by. Had someone taken my phone even for a minute, the thought was so monstrous, so deeply repellent, that I almost dismissed it. This was my family, but Mark's sneering face kept flashing in my mind, his greedy eyes, his entitled demand for $50,000. The coincidence was too glaring to ignore. I felt a surge of sickness. Could my own sister be involved in something so cruel? I had to know. With a sense of dread, I called Jessica. I tried to keep my voice even, masking the suspicion that was poisoning my thoughts. "Jess, something terrible happened," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "Someone hacked our bank account yesterday and stole all our savings." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a beat of silence that stretched just a fraction of a second too long. "Oh my God, Nancy, that's horrible. Are you okay? How much did they take?" Her voice was pitched with what sounded like a perfect imitation of shock and sympathy, but something was off. It felt rehearsed. I told her the amount, $90,000, and listened for her reaction. There was another slight hesitation before she gasped, 90,000, that's everything, I can't believe it. People are such monsters. The performance was good, but I knew my sister. I knew the subtle tells, the slight waver in her voice when she was lying. I decided to set a trap. The weirdest thing, Jess, I said, forcing a note of confusion into my voice, is that the bank said the transfer was made to an account at a small local credit union, Westwood Financial. Ever heard of it? I had made the name up. The bank hadn't told me anything about the destination. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then Mark's voice, muffled but audible, came from the background. Just say no. He hissed, clearly not realizing I could hear him. Jessica cleared her throat. No, she said, her voice suddenly tight. Never heard of it. Listen, Nan, I have to go. A patient just came in. Let me know what the police say. I'm so sorry. And she hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, the blood roaring in my ears. He had told her what to say. They knew. They had to know. The final damning piece of the puzzle clicked into place just an hour later. I was talking to my mom, telling her the story, when she said something that made my blood run cold. Oh, honey, that's awful. You know, it's funny. Mark was having trouble with his phone at the party yesterday. He asked to borrow mine for a few minutes to make a call. I didn't think anything of it. My mother and I were on the same family phone plan. A text message sent to my phone would also appear as a notification on hers through the carrier's network settings. He hadn't used my phone. He had used my mother's. He had seen the two-factor authentication code pop up on her screen. It was all there, the motive, the means, the opportunity, the pathetic, transparent lies, fury, pure and incandescent, burned away the shock and grief. This wasn't a random act of violence by a faceless criminal. This was a calculated betrayal by the two people I should have been able to trust most in the world. I called Mark directly. He answered on the second ring, his voice smug. Nancy, what's up? I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I know it was you, Mark. The line was quiet for a moment, then he let out a low chuckle, a sound so devoid of remorse it made my skin crawl. Took you long enough, so what if it was? My voice was dangerously calm. Why, he snorted, the same arrogant, dismissive sound from the party. Why, because you've had it too easy, Nancy. You and your perfect house and your perfect husband. You flaunt your success while the rest of us struggle. We needed it more than you did. Consider it a long, overdue redistribution of wealth. His words hit me with the force of a physical blow, not because they were insulting, but because they were so utterly, pathologically self-serving. He felt entitled to my life's work. He felt he deserved it. You won't get away with this, I said, my voice shaking with rage. Oh, I think I already have. He shot back. It's your word against mine. A digital transfer with no paper trail. Good luck proving anything. Now, if you'll excuse me, my wife and I have some celebrating to do. He hung up. I was left in a silence that was no longer empty, but filled with the sound of my own shattered illusions. The fight was just beginning, and I would not lose. For 2 full days, I was paralyzed by a rage so profound it was a physical presence, a constant, burning pressure behind my eyes. I wanted to scream, to smash things, to drive to their cramped little apartment and confront them, but David, my ever-steady David, held me back. Rage is a weapon, Nancy, he told me, his hands firm on my shoulders. But if you swing it wildly, you'll only hurt yourself. We have to be smart. We have to be cold. We have to be architects, not demolition experts. He was right. A hysterical confrontation was what Mark wanted. He would thrive on the drama, twist my words, and paint me as the unstable, jealous sister. He had called my bluff, confident that I had no concrete proof. So I would get it. I would build a case against him so solid, so irrefutable, that his entire world would crumble under its weight. My grief and fury were channeled, forged into a single, focused purpose, revenge, not a petty, screaming match revenge, but a quiet, systematic dismantling of their lives, using the very tools they despised me for having. My intelligence, my resources, and my meticulous attention to detail. My profession had taught me how to be a detective. I spent my days digging through public records, property deeds, and financial statements. I knew how to follow a paper trail, and I knew that no one, especially not an amateur like Mark, was clever enough to leave no trace at all. I started with a simple, legal maneuver. I hired a private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop named Frank, whose fee was steep but worth every penny. I didn't need him to prove the transfer. I needed him to paint a picture of Mark and Jessica's life. While Frank got to work, I started my own digital investigation. I remembered that years ago, I had helped Jessica set up her first laptop and had linked her cloud storage to my own family account for easy photo sharing. On a long shot, I checked to see if the link was still active. It was. It was a stunning lapse in their operational security, an arrogant oversight that would be their undoing. Inside, buried in a folder labeled Vacation Pics, I found a gold mine. Recent photos, taken just last month, of them on a weekend trip they claimed they couldn't afford. But it wasn't the photos that interested me, it was the metadata. Hidden within each image file were the GPS coordinates of where the picture was taken. One set of coordinates wasn't from their vacation spot. It was from a new, upscale condominium development on the other side of town, a place where units started at $500,000. I referenced the date of the photo with my own calendar. It was the day after they had stolen my money. My heart hammered in my chest. I pulled up the county's property records database, a system I knew like the back of my hand. I searched for recent sales in that specific condominium building. And there it was, a deed of sale, filed just 3 weeks ago. The buyers, Mark and Jessica. The purchase price, $525,000, and the down payment, listed right there in black and white on the mortgage documents, which were also public record, $90,000. To the exact dollar, they hadn't used the money to pay off debts or to fund Mark's imaginary trading career. They had used my life savings, the product of my sweat and sleepless nights, to buy a luxury condo they had no business being in. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Frank, my pie, delivered his report 2 days later. It was even more damning. Mark's day trading was a complete sham. He had a small, pathetic online account with a few $100s in it. His real habit was online gambling, heist, stakes poker, and sports betting. He had debts totaling over $30,000 to several shady offshore sites. He wasn't an investor, he was a desperate addict. Frank had also obtained copies of their bank statements through legal channels, showing a sudden, unexplained deposit of $90,000, followed immediately by the wire transfer to the condominium's escrow company. The final piece was a detailed report of their spending since the theft. Designer clothes, expensive restaurant meals, a new top-of-the-line television. They were living a fantasy life on my dime. I now had a mountain of evidence, bank records, public property deeds, mortgage agreements, evidence of gambling debts, and a clear timeline of their actions. I compiled everything into a neat, organized binder, each document tabbed and highlighted. It was a masterpiece of cold, hard facts. Mark thought he was clever, hiding behind a simple digital transfer, but he was sloppy. He was arrogant. He had underestimated me, seeing me not as a competent professional, but as his wife's lucky sister. He thought he had stolen my money. He had no idea he had just handed me the weapon I would use to destroy him. I chose the venue for the final act with deliberate care, my parents' house. It was a neutral ground, but it was also the scene of the original crime, the place where they had smiled in my face while plotting my ruin. I called a family dinner, inviting my parents, Mark and Jessica. I kept my voice light and cheerful on the phone, telling them I wanted to put the recent unpleasantness behind us and move forward. Jessica sounded relieved, Mark sounded smug, no doubt believing he had won. David and I arrived early. I placed my binder on the center of the dining room table, its dark cover a somber presence in the warm, familiar room. My parents were happy to see us, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. When Mark and Jessica walked in, they were wearing their stolen wealth like a costume. Jessica had a new designer handbag, and Mark was sporting a watch that cost more than my first car. They greeted everyone with a practiced, easy charm that now made my stomach turn. We sat down to dinner, and the small talk was excruciating. My mom chattered about her garden, my dad about his golf game. Mark boasted about a killer investment that was about to pay off big, and I let him talk, letting him dig his own grave a little deeper. Finally, as my mother was clearing the plates, I placed my hand on the binder. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet chatter, there's one last thing I'd like to discuss. All eyes turned to me. I looked directly at Mark, then at Jessica. We need to talk about my $90,000. The color drained from Jessica's face. Mark, however, leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. Nancy, are we really going to do this again? I thought you were ready to let it go. You can't prove a thing. That's where you're wrong, I said calmly. I opened the binder. For the next 20 minutes I laid out my case, my voice even and devoid of emotion. I presented the bank statements showing the transfer. I presented the public deed of sale for their new condominium. I presented the mortgage application where they had listed the $90,000 as a gift from an anonymous relative. I presented Frank's report on Mark's gambling debts. I presented the geotagged photos from their visit to the condo. With each new piece of evidence, Jessica shrank further into her chair, her face a mask of horror and shame. Mark's smirk slowly dissolved, replaced by a pasty slack, jawed shock. My parents looked on, their expression shifting from confusion to stunned disbelief and finally to heartbreak. You told me you were having phone trouble. My mom said, her voice a wounded whisper as she looked at Mark. You used me. You used my phone to steal from my daughter. I closed the binder. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. So here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice as hard as steel. You have two options. Option A, you list the condominium for sale tomorrow morning. You will sell it, and you will return every single cent of my $90,000, plus the cost of my private investigator and legal fees. You will sign a legally binding confession, and then you will disappear from my life. I will never see you or speak to you again. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Option B, I continued, is that I don't get my money by the end of next month. If that happens, this entire binder gets hand-delivered to the district attorney's office. Bank fraud, wire fraud, perjury on a mortgage application. That's a collection of federal offenses. You'll both face prison time. Mark, your IT career will be over. Jessica, you'll lose your license as a dental hygienist. You'll have a criminal record that will follow you for the rest of your lives. And just for good measure, I will also sue you in civil court for damages. I will garnish your wages and bankrupt you for the next 30 years. Mark finally found his voice, sputtering, you wouldn't. I leaned forward, my eyes locking with his. The rage I had kept so carefully contained was now present in my voice, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. You snorted in my face and told me you needed it more. You stole my future so you could buy a fancy apartment and pretend to be something you're not. You watched my world fall apart and you laughed. Test me, Mark. I dare you. Jessica burst into tears, her body shaking with sobs. We'll do it, she cried, looking at me with red, swollen eyes. We'll give it back, all of it. I'm so sorry, Nancy. Mark just sat there, defeated. The arrogant, smug man who had laughed at me on the phone was gone, replaced by a pale, terrified shell. He had been so sure of his own cleverness, so certain of my weakness. He had never imagined that I would be the architect of his ruin. The power in the room had shifted, completely and irrevocably. I had won. The aftermath was not a joyous celebration. It was a quiet, somber process of untangling the mess they had made. True to their word, under the threat of total annihilation, Mark and Jessica moved with a speed I had never seen them display before. The condominium was listed the next day. It was a seller's market, and they got an offer within a week. I had my lawyer draft the confession and the repayment agreement, and they signed it without a single protest in his sterile, silent office. Jessica cried through the entire signing. Mark just stared at the table, his face a blank mask of defeat. The closing happened a month later. A wire transfer appeared in my account for the full amount, plus the additional fees I had incurred. Seeing the balance restored didn't bring the elation I had expected. There was a sense of relief, of justice served, but it was hollow. The money had been returned, but the trust, the love, the shared history, all of that was gone forever, burned to ashes by their greed. The fallout within the family was devastating. My parents were heartbroken, caught between their two daughters. They were furious with Mark and Jessica, but the instinct to protect their child, even a child who had done something so monstrous, was strong. Our relationship became strained, filled with unspoken words and a deep, shared sadness for what our family had become. They couldn't look at me without seeing the pain I had endured, and they couldn't look at Jessica without feeling the shame of her betrayal. I knew it would take a long, long time for those wounds to even begin to heal, if they ever could. As for me and David, we made a decision. We cut them out, completely. We blocked their numbers, their social media, and instructed our family not to share any information about us with them. It was a brutal, painful amputation, but it was necessary. The poison of their envy and resentment could no longer have a place in our lives. We had to protect the sanctuary we had built. Months have passed now. The sharp edges of the betrayal have started to dull, though I know the scar will always remain. Life has found a new normal. I'm still thriving in my career, but my perspective has shifted. I've learned to be more guarded, more discerning about who I let into my inner circle. The event forced me to see the world not as I wished it was, but as it is, a place where even the brightest days can have the darkest shadows, but it also showed me the incredible strength of my partnership with David. He was my anchor in the storm, my strategist, my unwavering support. Our bond, tested by fire, was now stronger and more resilient than ever. We took the restored money, and instead of putting it back into savings, we booked a month-long trip to Italy, something we had always dreamed of. It felt like a reclamation, a way of washing away the taint of the theft and creating new, beautiful memories. One morning, sitting at a small cafe in Florence, watching the sunrise paint the sky over the Duomo, David took my hand. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. I took a sip of my cappuccino and looked out at the ancient, beautiful city. "I am," I said, and for the first time in a long time, I truly meant it. I lost a sister, but I learned what I'm made of. The theft had taken my money and for a short time my peace, but in the end it had given me something far more valuable in return, the cold, hard certainty of my own strength. They had tried to demolish my life, but they had forgotten one crucial detail. I was the architect, and I could always rebuild.